Hello and welcome to another ACCLN Hangout. And this time we'll focus on wicked problems. Hello, Amanda.
Hey, Roland.
It's a place where I can share our learning and teaching adventures and dream about future professional learning activities.
And thank you so much for persisting with us with the technical difficulties this evening. And as usual, if you're watching us live, you can post a question to our panel by going to todaysmeet.com/ACCELN. And on Twitter, you can use the hashtag ACCELN. And even for this special session tonight, the hashtag ACCE2016.
We like to live a dangerous multitasking life. I'm Roland Guesthausen, a teacher from down under, southern Australia, below the Tropic of Capricorn, slightly under the snow line. I'm a full-time teacher and feral wordsmith.
I'm Amanda Rablin, an e-learning coordinator from sunny Brisbane, although it's been a bit cold the last few days. And I have had a fun week making birthday cakes and that look like the solar system, and a glow-in-the-dark star tunnel, as you do for a little person's birthday. It wasn't quite a wicked problem, but I guess we'll learn all about those this evening. We'll get our panel to introduce themselves, and we also have with us Dr. Jason Zagami, and then I'll introduce our very special guest. Jason, you want to say hello?
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Zagami from Griffith University, and I've got the flu.
Oh no. Man flu or normal flu?
Oh, definitely man flu.
Oh dear. Well, if you just want to sit here there and go, ugh, we understand. We'll just mute you. Okay, and our very special guest this evening, Associate Professor Michael Henderson. Okay, phew, I should rehearse these things. Please introduce yourself, kind sir.
Well, that's about it, really. I'm an Associate Professor at Monash University in the Faculty of Education. I started off as a school teacher in Queensland, so I'm a proud Queenslander, although now I'm a Victorian, so I've crossed the border, or a couple of borders. I also spent quite a bit of time in teaching in England, and for the last 10 years I've been researching the area of educational technologies. And at the moment I've got the privilege of convening or leading the Learning with New Media research group, which is an interdisciplinary sort of group of researchers, about 19 of us, focusing on a range of topics. So,
fabulous.
Back to you.
Ooh. Well, tonight we do get to speak with our lovely ACCE 2016 keynote. You forgot to mention that bit, Michael, about the notion of wicked problems.
Yes, fantastic.
Well, Michael, perhaps you can clarify. I've had a few questions. What exactly are wicked problems?
Evil ones?
Yeah, well, look, the wicked problem is a concept that's been around for a very long time, and it's been attributed to two people called Rittel and Weber back in the 70s, and they were really focusing on social policies and nothing to do with technology and education. But it's this idea that has evolved, and I think is now hitting education much more commonly, and it's something that I like to talk about because it wraps up sort of the essential or fundamental concern that I've got about why things work here but they don't work over there. Why does a great lesson work here but not the next day? And really, Rittel and Weber, they talked about wicked problems. They said it's different from tame problems, such as that we might find in a chess game where there's rules and concepts that sort of don't change. You know, the game play changes, but the rules don't. And the same with technology. I'd say that technology is not a wicked problem in itself. Ultimately, you can pull it apart and figure out its bits and bytes, and you can figure out how to make something happen or why something's not happening. So the wicked aspect to the wicked problem is really referring to this idea of resistance to resolution. So not something sinister or evil, and it's essentially therefore something that's unresolvable. Whenever you make one change to try and fix or to find a satisfying solution to a problem that you've observed, the simple nature of you trying to fix it, trying to do something differently, changes the context and it really simply adds this extra ripple into the chaos that we deal with. And for me, that really is all about education. Every time we do one little thing, we think we've got something just right here, something over there doesn't quite work anymore. And so we constantly are playing this orchestration of, in our case, technologies and the classroom or whatever context we're in. So the problem for me is not the technology. I think that's something that we can manage. It's to do with the sheer complexity of education, and not least the diversity of teachers and students, policy, schools, just concepts of learning. And I have to say that recognizing that problem becomes really, really hard. And I'm sort of now going to this idea of thinking, well, what would it mean to address wicked problems? And I think perhaps something along the lines of wicked designs might be a neat little idea to play with. So I've got a question for the panel, actually. So Jason, you might have to man up there. But if your voice cuts out, don't worry. It's wonderful to have you here, despite being so ill. Look, what I'd love to know, just to prove to me that I'm not just making this up in my head, but can you describe a situation where you've implemented or you've seen some educational technology being implemented, some innovation that sort of worked here, but as soon as you did it, and so this is for Amanda, Roland, and Jason, but as soon as you did it, something unexpected occurred, and that meant that you then had to grapple with this new, unexpected kind of issue.
I could kick off with something, I suppose.
Go on.
I was thinking about how we're encouraging our students to embrace failure, and it's part of the language of a lot of the ways that teachers are working these days. But when you open that can of worms in a classroom, and you might have an intellectual honesty that begins to run through, it also opens up a few trapdoors in the way that students are working. Does that mean we accept failure? We encourage failure? In fact, why am I even here? And I've just found myself sort of backing out of that quagmire by retracing my steps back to some sort of mark-driven assessment. I enjoyed the journey. There was some wonderful intellectual honesty by the students about learning from mistakes, but it was a really difficult point to move forward from.
That's a fantastic example, because really you start by engaging with this idea in an honest kind of way about failure and saying, okay, it's okay to fail. Let's get into situations of failure and try to work our way out of it. But then you come up right against this culture of assessment and individualized performance. And so really what you're finding there, by bringing this great idea, this great innovation, you think this is going to work, and all of a sudden this unexpected complication, and in this case, the culture of individualized performance is a big one, and it's very hard to deal with. Amanda, Jason, you're welcome to jump in if you got an idea.
Certainly, the wickedest problem I tend to face is systemic restrictions on students' online access, while at the same time trying to prepare them for an online world. We seem to have quite a dichotomous perspective on that, where on one hand we're trying to provide the safest possible environment, which is closed down, and students can only do things within a closed system. But on the other hand, that system is there to try to allow them to engage with an online sharing world.
Yeah, absolutely, and we have these tensions then between our intent and the language around technology, and of course then we have always this focus on the rose garden walls that protect our students, which is not really opening up opportunities for taking authentic risk. So I think those are great examples of problems that when we try to apply a solution. I try to avoid the word solution, because I'm embedded in this idea that we can never have solutions. We can only have iterations. We can only have the next best idea. And then I think, to be honest about it, what we need to be doing is measuring what we're doing, or keeping track of it, rather than jumping from here to to there with our ideas. But the idea is there in that case, that we have this idea that we need to have students being able to access this great resource of the internet, but as soon as we start tackling that, we come up against issues of risk-taking and whether or not that risk is acceptable. So, Amanda, you're welcome to jump in, or we can sort of maybe talk about some bigger issues as well.
I guess it's my turn. It's only fair that the others have shared. I guess, so mine is about self-directed learning. So when teachers make changes to the way that they approach learning and teaching, and then they jump from this idea of, okay, I am the center of information, I'm delivering this content to students, to the notion of, okay, I need students to take responsibility for their own learning. And one of the things they find when they first begin to implement these ideas and approaches is the students are not used to learning in that way. They're used to doing school normally, and you're hit by this situation of, how do I undo what has come before this moment in time to get to the type of learning that I want to happen in my classroom? How do I help students become self-directed? Because I really want to do that, but they're not ready. They've been schooled or learned to do it a different way.
Absolutely. And so how do you approach that, and how do you start to tackle that? Have you got any ideas like that you've seen that's sort of been chipping away at that, been working? I
think it's one of those things that takes a lot of iterations and a bit more time than I guess you can be useful, hoping for. So you kind of have to begin to apply a scaffolded process to get them to break down those assumptions, give them little bits of control, get a feel for it before moving to this new one. Yes, lots of worksheets, Roland. I saw your comment. Or I guess throwing them in the deep end and watching them grapple with the different ideas. So throwing something that is seriously problem-based and giving them the challenge of, okay, you have to create something awesome from this concept. You have to solve a problem, and I'm going to be here with you, but the answer is yours. There is no set answer to what you're designing. Let's see what we can make. So I guess framing it as more of a challenge, perhaps.
Yeah, so you've actually listed a few really great strategies, but the interesting thing for me is that whenever you implement any one of those strategies, it's always contingent. I would assume it'd be contingent, because you might take that deep challenge approach with certain students, but you might shy away with that strategy with other students. You know, you're constantly changing your strategies according to who you're working with, and inherently then, and I love the idea that you're talking about iterations, because I think that's where we need to go as teachers more so. I think we do it already, but I think we need to bring the language out of iterations, and we become a long view profession where we're talking about iterations and we're saying we are good, we're going to get better, but it's not going to be tomorrow. You know, like we're just going to keep working at this thing. I think we do it, but it's just making that language of design, and this is where I'm going to now. Like I think in approaching wicked problems, we need to move towards this design thinking approach. So it's interesting. I can't remember who it was. I was just reading recently someone who was just relating that any design, is in itself going to be a wicked problem, because there's so many concepts and variables involved, and as soon as you start tackling, say, the needs of one user group, you're getting sort of problems elsewhere, and so it's never ending. And for me, that explains a degree of creativity and persistence and sustainability in our practices. One of the things that I've just been doing recently, actually this morning, is writing an editorial for a journal that I edit. And it's thinking about tonight, I started to reflect on it and thinking it's got some relevance. So in that editorial that I'm just drafting up, I talk about the issue of scalability. So if we think about education technology, or particularly that tension between education and technology is the wicked problem, and how that helps to explain why innovations cannot be simply replicated from one location to the next and all the outcomes guaranteed, then I think when we think about it, is this idea of taking one idea from here and offering it to other teachers. Whether you're a government department or a school leader or simply an e-learning specialist or just someone with a passion and you want to offer another idea somewhere else, how can we really support this? And if you look at the field of literature around scaling up, diffusion and innovation, and simply design reuse, then there's a very large corpus of literature around the space. It's been researched for decades. And they still haven't come up with an idea. Well, sorry, I'll take it back. Don't quote me on that. They've come up with lots of ideas, but they haven't come up with a solution. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah.
But the answer is 42. Oh, I'm sorry.
Of course, it always is. It always is. And while that gets a laugh, it still doesn't help us out.
The question was wrong.
So, look. So I just want to make a point here about some of the literature in this space, just to show that, we're not being fools in education. We haven't missed the plot here. It's hard stuff. These, a lot of people have been researching this stuff for ages. So there's this idea of scaling up. Now, a person that's particularly sort of noteworthy in this area, and particularly in terms of educational technology, is a professor called Chris Deed. And in 2006, he came up with a bit of a framework, and he said, okay, if you're going to scale up, you need to consider these things. You need to know about the depth, so the significance of the innovation, the sustainability, so the ability for us to keep it going over time, the spread, so obviously it has to go across a broad, diverse range of contexts, and it has to be able to evolve, and it has to shift. It has to allow someone to take ownership of it so that they can then play with it. So you have all these concepts of scalability, but the problem is that once we start playing in any one context, Chris actually noted that often we fall into this replication trap, this design that we keep thinking that if we say it clearly enough, if we shout it loud enough, if we dumb it down enough, if we create the dummy's guide to whatever use of a technology or flipped classroom strategy or something, then other people will be able to use it. So we keep falling into this replication trap. But if we look further and we look back into this language, you would have heard of the early adopters and laggards and early majority, late majority, innovators. The language that Rogers came up with in diffusion of innovations theory. That's got the idea that we just sort of somehow shift. It's just natural that we move across these things. More and it has this kind of rationalistic approach to technology and education, that we have all we need to know is about knowledge and persuasion and decision making. You look at other theories like TAM, the technology acceptance model. That's about, well, if we perceive the usefulness, then we're more likely to use it. We've got other theories like unified theory of acceptance and use of technology, UTA-UT. That's a mouthful. And it comes to this idea that, well, if we have an idea of how much effort we have to expend on a new innovation, that's one of the variables that will mean that we end up using it. So it's all this kind of very rationalistic kind of approach to adoption of technologies. We can look at CBAM and we can look at so many other theories. And it links to this underlying problem that we've got, the wicked problem of education technology. I think one of our big ones that's underneath so much, this idea of technological determinism. That technology will fix things, that it will improve conditions, that just because it will help. And so it has this idea that we must go through stages and phases. We have ideas like the SAMR model, where it's this idea that, well, unless we're right at that redefinition point, then there's something wrong with us. It's also the problems of this language around logical and reasoned action. But where is the deep connection to values, beliefs, culture, and identity? And for me, that's one of the problems in our body of literature. We can start looking at communities of practice and other kinds of theories, and I think we need to do so more. So I just got my soapbox there.
So do you think we've been trying to simplify and replicate the issue? Because I guess it's one of those things we keep trying to understand, and maybe the question is, why has educational technology, or why has technology not made this dramatic impact on education that everyone thought it would, or we hoped it would, or maybe it does in pockets here and there? are we trying to make the answer too simple?
Well, I think quite a few intelligent people, I think Jason's made this point in previous conversations with him as well, is that what are we actually trying to measure? You know, we seem to be saying that we have succeeded or failed based on someone else's measuring stick. And we're sort of marching to the drum beats of media and policy, and I dare say sometimes ill-informed policy. This idea of digital natives and the digital revolution, and that technology is going to fix things. Again, buying into this technological determinism approach. But if we can say that technologies are part of what will add to this complex layering of, the wicked problem, and the teachers have to orchestrate and iteratively develop their practices, then really, rather than focusing on trying to impossibly trying to demonstrate that throwing a bit of technology here is going to improve these learning outcomes, which is an incredibly hard thing to do in any context, let alone education. But if we shift away from that and say, well, okay, what are the iterations, and can we demonstrate a robust and empirically driven, so the things that we have seen and measured and being able to understood and perceive, if we're basing on those things as professionals and say, okay, this is how we're now tackling it in our next iteration and our next, if we can document that or have a sense of that as part of our language of being a teacher, and it's accepted and understood by leaders and policymakers and people who budget, then I think we're shifting the language away from trying to prove that technology is making a learning outcome or that kind of change, but demonstrating how technology, along with our iterative practices, are achieving our needs. An interesting thing with wicked problems is that we can't solve them, right? But we have this language around satisfying them. And it seems a bit strange in this day and age where we talk about satisfactory as being the middle point of a like-it response indicator or something, where it's sort of like it's only okay. But actually in wicked problems, we're actually saying, well, that's okay actually, because you've got a problem and you're satisfying the need for the moment, but you're not trying to pretend that it's a solution forever. And so I'd be saying, let's move away from looking for the universal design. Let's buy a smartboard, put it in the classroom, it's going to fix things. So we move away from that universal design and look at the process of design. And I think that is the way that I understand my approach to wicked problems.
So in that case, the really the question that we've been trying to ask is, does this technology improve learning outcomes? How do we break down that as the main question that people are trying to answer? Because obviously we don't have a set answer for that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. How do we, I guess, shift the language around that to something a little more helpful, that is more in line with the ideas you're sharing, or with viewing it as a wicked problem?
Well, it's a difficult one there, because you're crossing over a few potential. You're talking about a couple of different possible goals here. Is the goal to prove our own identity as gadget freaks and to justify ourselves in a school system, and demonstrating that actually technology is good and cool and the world is groovy, which, hopefully we're not trying to prove. Okay. But we've got to recognize that that's part of our drive in engaging with technologies as part of our identity, and therefore we'd rather be able to demonstrate that technology is cool and good, and it's worth the investment of money and time and resources, and it's not just us geeks and freaks out there sort of playing with this stuff. So if we shift away from that, then we say, well, why are we even trying? So rather than trying to demonstrate that, and rather than trying to march to the drum beats of others, I recognise we have to sometimes. The boss says, why should I give you this money? But if we turn around and say, well, okay, I'm not going to try and demonstrate or prove something that I can't prove, and that's learning outcomes. It was extremely hard to demonstrate anything sort of that's quite robust and believable. Then what are we trying to prove? And for me, technology has always been the Trojan horse, or the silicon bullet, or the Trojan mouse, whichever of those you'd like better. And it's just that moment, that privilege of levering a conversation or an ability to get in and talk to someone else about their practices. So for me, it's about the iterative design, regardless of whether it includes technology or not. But because it's my identity, inevitably technologies always start to seep in about how I react to issues around me and how I can see new opportunities. So I haven't really answered your question, but I've just sort of set up a challenge there about what are we really trying to achieve.
Can I ask, Michael, is there consensus of what we're actually working towards? When I'm often challenging teachers who have that great new shiny toy in the classroom, what are you doing with it? Why do you want it to be there? Do we agree on what edutech problems we're actually solving? Because they often come up with different answers.
Well, we've got different audience, don't we? We've got a certain need to demonstrate to our head of department or principal or funding body that the thing that they've just invested is worth it, that somehow, and even if we're not engaged in it necessarily, I think there's still an onus on us to demonstrate that, because we don't want to get ourselves into hot water. I mean, one of the first things I did when I took up a head of department position at a school was to rescind the rule that the teachers had to make students use their laptops in every single lesson. It sort of seemed a bit strange to force students to have a laptop opened up on their table when the teachers themselves weren't too sure how it actually fitted in with this particular component of their curriculum or their practices. So it's one of those things, Ron, that we keep trying to tackle so many different audience needs along with our own, and all wrapped up in this language around student learning outcomes. And I don't think half the time that we talk about student learning outcomes that we're really talking about student learning outcomes. We're talking about other priorities and needs. And it's a hard space to be. So I agree with you. If we can identify exactly what we're trying to achieve, then maybe we can have a much more firm conversation about the steps and the processes.
I was wondering if when we're struggling to sometimes even identify best practice as part of that we're not even sure where we're going.
Yeah. Sorry,
Maybe the word best isn't particularly helpful when you're looking at the idea of best practice. It implies that everyone should be doing the same thing. But if we're looking at it as you're making these adjustments particularly for your audience, there is no best. It's just what works.
But I've seen Amanda's class. She's got all those flashing things, and the kids look really interested. And you're running around your feet, and we should have that happening in every classroom in the school.
Actually, it's just the dad jokes or teacher jokes. You know, that's what gets learning happening. So use those.
But hold on, I should go back. I'll agree with Roland. We should have it in every classroom, but we should have the bit where you're saying that the kids are excited and engaged and things are happening and learning. All the bit about technology. Okay, sometimes we focus too much on the gizmo, the gadget, the perceived technology as the agent in here, and we keep forgetting this funny little figure called Amanda, who is this marvelous orchestrator of kids and timing and pace and emotions and affect and understanding trajectories of learners over time, understanding policy frameworks, curriculum frameworks, learning theory, orchestrating all of this together along with her own personality and humour. And we've got a fantastic teacher. So blushing? But,
I think you're overstating it, but I appreciate it.
Well, Roland, one of the challenges I think is when we talk about our practices and we tell other people about these great things, I think sometimes we need to start with our problem. I think that's where we should start, rather than saying, hey, I just used this technology, whether it's Google or Arduino or whatever. So rather than starting there, which is often what we do, because that's like the elevator pitch, isn't it? That's kind of thing, hey, this is a great bit of kit, I'm going to wow you about it. But first of all, start with the problem. What were you trying to resolve? And of course, remember, the problem could be that all these learners are doing a fantastic job. I just want to challenge them even further. The problem is I want to challenge further. It doesn't. Problem is not necessarily a victimization kind of term here. Start there, and then unfold about the iterations that you're engaged with, and it's going to open up the messiness of it, and it's also going to unpack the achievability of engaging with that technology. Rather than saying Arduino and half the people are going to freak out and close their eyes and run away. You can sort of start to reveal that complication. here I am, though, I'm proposing that almost as if this is the way to go. And of course, that sort of goes against what I've just been arguing for the last half hour, that there is no such thing as a single one design.
I was just about to say, but Michael said this is the answer, so let's all do that.
Right. Well, I did get I did get prompted before about not spruiking the conference enough.
Should we do that then?
Maybe we should.
Okay. So, did you know Michael's also keynoting at ACCE 2016? And what are you talking about there? Can we expect more of these challenges? Will we get to do craft, which was a challenge with craft, which was part of the QSite conference last year? I love that.
Yeah, I think we're going to do that. And thank you for that strange prompt there. That was out of the blue. I hadn't expected that. But no, the conference is going to be fantastic. So if you haven't signed up for the ACCE conference in Brisbane, it's coming soon. So definitely get on. It's going to be fantastic. I am privileged, or maybe I've just got the sympathy vote because I lost my voice last ACCE conference. But I'm privileged to do one of the keynotes, and I will be talking about the wicked problem of ed and tech. I'm not going to focus on scalability and diffusion of innovation kinds of theories. That just sort of came out of today. But I will want to talk about some classic activities of strategies that we deal with technologies in the classroom and how that reveals the wickedness of education technology, including, Roland, what you were talking about in taking risks, and Amanda about risks taking and those kind of things with social media. And that's going to lead me on to talking about design thinking and design approaches, and that's going to lead me to talk about creativity and some stuff that I've been doing recently around risk taking, and ultimately I'm going to then poo-poo it all by saying, actually, there's a bit of a problem in all of this. I think we're taking ourselves a bit too seriously. We're going to take a degree of design thinking, which is messy. It's not stages. It's not strategic thinking all the way through. Some of it is intuitive, and things come out of the blue and changes on the go. If we're dealing with creativity, which is, again, a tricky topic to deal with, which involves risk-taking, which, of course, in teaching and in education, we're sort of attuned to not take risks, even though we know learning ultimately requires risk-taking. And so we have a really big wicked problem there. And I was saying, well, maybe what we need to do is take a degree of playfulness. So not taking things too seriously, which in itself, again, rubs up against our cultures of accountability and identity. So I'm going to traverse a lot of space. I'm going to be hoofing it along, and yeah, we're going to do some craft. We're going to have some music pumping, and we're going to have a bit of play.
I love the spoilers in that. Thank you so much.
Love the connection with play there. Do you think education is the next frontier of design thinking? Because it sounds like it's bigger than just edutech, Michael. Just curious.
yeah. No, design thinking is certainly it's becoming a very common idea now in education. I think. Well, I shouldn't say very common, I suppose. It just happens to be that all my Google searches, strangely enough, come up with ads around design thinking. Strange that I don't know how Google knows, but it certainly is becoming more common. So there's organisations making money out of doing design thinking with schools and school systems. You have some great resources from IDEO and others. And it's even mentioned in ACCELN's documentation as a potentially very valuable way of doing professional learning. And of course, design thinking is mentioned in the Australian curriculum. So design thinking is around, but I'd be saying, on the one hand, a number of people are taking it in a very kind of formulaic approach. And on the other hand, it's sort of taken in a very superficial way. So and I'd be saying, well, no, we need to probably take it deeper and play with it a bit more, and don't get so bogged down with sort of brands of design thinking or stages of design thinking. And I'll explain that a little bit in the keynote as well. If you get me started now, I won't stop for quite a while.
Okay. Michael, when you sort of look at wicked problems, is it possibly that we're not looking at the wide enough systems involved, and that we're too narrow in our perspective on problems, So we just keep replicating attempts to tinker with well-entrenched problems without looking outside the box, as the term is, from different perspectives, and trying for that moonshot solution, which might, well, it's very difficult to achieve, might be significant enough to actually create real change to the wicked problem.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. You've really nailed it there. I think we aren't going to that systemic level, and often it's because people are, especially in education, working in this the siloed or isolated, the four walls of the classroom kind of boxes, and so often our practices are cordoned away, and we don't have the power to, or feel that we're empowered to be able to speak back to the more larger systemic issues. So, yeah, I think so, and I think the examples that the three of you came up with were really good. They were far better examples than I was actually expecting, because they all revealed such deep kinds of cultural tensions or system policy kinds of tensions going on that I think sets us up as being in this very complicated space. And Jason, exactly for that reason, I tend to go towards the design thinking approach as a way to respond to wicked problems. Because design thinking does suggest to us to look beyond those four walls and to spend as much time trying to understand the problem as dealing with any potential iterative outcome. So, and that's something we don't often do. We often sit down as teachers, go into a staff room or do some planning or do something, and we very quickly sort of decide what's the problem, what's the pragmatic outcome, and let's go and do it. And we don't spend a long time figuring out what's the underlying fundamental concerns. So, in one of the concerns that you three were talking about, the issue, for instance, of the culture of individual performance, we can throw our hands up and say, well, we can't change it. But if we recognise that as the problem, or a problem, a learned issue that students are very experienced in education. As much as we say, take a risk, no problem, no worries, but work in groups, whatever. We can say that as much as we like and as loud as we like, but they've got 10 years of experience knowing that actually, no, it's an individual response again, or grade they're going to get.
If it counts, how do we not doing that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it might not even be so conscious as that, and. But I think we've got to recognise things, and if we understand that, rather than railing against it and saying there's something wrong with our students, we go, well, okay, how do we start building up an iterative approach to it?
We have a question from one of our listeners, Michael, if I can just put that to you, or it's really more of a statement, really.
Yeah, statements, yeah.
If the teaching's bad, technology can really turn it into a disaster. I guess that's
the technology is an amplifier kind of idea.
Yeah, it makes the obnoxious even more so, and I guess we know that from experience of social media, that there are some wonderful positive benefits that can come out of it, and also the ability to amplify all of the obnoxious behaviour. Does it come back to ask again, what kind of problem are we trying to solve?
Well, actually, I want to question that. I haven't thought about it. It's a fantastic statement. But part of me doesn't really want to accept that very easily, because if on the one hand I'm suggesting that technology can't make a great lesson design fantastic, a bad lesson design fantastic, because it's not maybe directed particularly to those students or understanding, whatever, but whatever you might want to understand bad lesson design to be. If I'm saying that, then is it okay to turn around the other way and say a great lesson design can be really horrible because of technology? I mean, things can go wrong. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I mean, sure, if you're completely reliant on one piece of technology for all of your activity and engagement, and you don't know how to talk to your students, I don't know. Yeah.
I started off with an activity once where there was this shared whiteboard, and the students, I think it was called Linolet, and the students could post messages in. So I had a few subversive questions, and you're probably looking at the screen here, you can see me pretending the board's in front of me. And anyway, it started off quite respectable, and the comments came in, and students would post some of the answers and some thoughts, and then sentences, and then paragraphs, and then they discovered they could post pictures, and they could post videos, and they could make the text very large. And it turned into this obnoxious, like Wild West of notice boards, as everyone was struggling to say something and resize. And the feeling was someone complained that that was a bit of useless activity. If anything, I turned it to something more useful, thinking my objective was to teach about collaborative problem solving, the importance of not being anonymous, having rules of behaviour, and those are all very valuable learning activities, perhaps not the one I decided when I'd set the activity up. Would that be an example of how I could turn it into a disaster? Or was it an opportunity?
It's just teaching, isn't it?
You know,
for 10 years I've been in the class, you know, like I taught technology, but I also taught English and history and other subjects, and just sometimes lessons go funny.
Yeah, they do.
And you create.
Probably says a lot for a good teacher and how you can rescue that and how you can build upon it or work of it. One of my best lessons was actually sitting and teaching IT under a tree when the power failed at Glen Waverley Secondary College. Is that perhaps saying something about the importance of the preferred solution that we're solving? The resilience of the teacher to grab an opportunity, build on it, look for connections, to have a sense of empathy where the students are coming from.
Well, you know, Yep, tap dancing is fantastic. I found that it's very important, as well as juggling. Anything to divert the attention. You know, look at me, look at me, look at me. But you know, again, for me, we're not talking about technology. We're just talking about that silicon bullet or the Trojan mouse. We're just talking about orchestration of teaching, and when we do have technologies in it, it adds that layer or multiple layers. And if things are going in ways that we can't handle, and our lessons are all sort of dependent on them, then sure, it could really feel like that technology has amplified the problem. But I'm hesitating to say that actually does amplify it. I think it might be more of a perceived thing, because regardless of technology, it could have been another kind of context. And does that amplify a problem?
That's fascinating. I love the connection with the play and education, and there's an organic playfulness in the narrative that you draw there, Michael, and also a very constructive one with the idea of being able to use the design thinking, something that's more solution-focused rather than problem-focused.
Oh, well, that's right. I mean, I think we need to be satisfying the problems and working towards those iterations. But one of the concerns that I've got is about how we might throw an idea into the mix, and then we say it worked, it didn't work, and at the end, and we don't see it as just that one extra step. And you know, in some research I was recently doing at higher education, not schools, we went out and specifically with the idea of taking these reported great examples of technology-enabled learning. So we surveyed students and staff, and we triangulated some of these great cases. They could have been any old thing, but you know, we dug down and found them. And we pursued it. Then we asked questions, not just what you did, but how did you come to do it this way? And it turned out in every single instance there was a long history of things that were happening, that they tried this and didn't work that, and they didn't realize this need of students, and then staffing changed, and this very complicated story of evolution. And if we then broke it down and say, well, these are iterations, and we might not have called them circular or cyclical iterative design processes, but we can actually sort of start to map it out. And then we start to see the socio-ecological problems here, or not problems, influences. So we're looking at how policy, budget, staffing, labour, cultural values, student expectations, pressures of assessment, these kinds of concerns, how they're all starting to shape what gets done, but also how it's understood, and then the investment in pursuing it further. Then all of a sudden we've got this rather messy and I think really enjoyable story of how we've come to this practice. And it highlights that this reported case study that we've got, this fantastic best practice, it's just one point in the continuum, and it's going to continue on. So then we also then spent time on saying, okay, so what's the next steps for you guys? You know, where are you going to go with this? What's your ideas? What's the barriers? What's the hurdles? What should leadership and administration do with this? And then we went and talked to leaders of universities from all 39 unis, and we said, well, what do you think of this? And you know, it's a fascinating story to try and map this example of when something worked and put it into a history or a timeline. So I think that is a fantastic idea. If you're trying to map out something that worked and you're trying to suggest that this should be taken elsewhere, look first at its history and go, well, okay, are we also going to then transfer this entire history of the evolution of the idea and its point in the trajectory and where it's going, and somehow translate all of that in another context? No wonder these things don't necessarily work, because we don't. We just say, do these three things.
Or just take product X and apply it here, and voila. So just listening to you speaking just then, I was wondering, given all of these complexities and histories, are wicked problems something that teachers can face alone, or is it something that cannot be separated from that social context or the others around them? Can it just be done with one teacher and their students?
It certainly can be done by a single teacher, but it's a wicked problem, and then engaging with the design thinking can be engaged by a single teacher. But certainly, if you want systemic change, then you need to be engaging people at a lot of different levels. Design thinking inherently sort of says, you know, we need to understand the problem, and we need to get diversification, our understandings of that problem, and the potential avenues of strategies that we can employ. So, you know, engaging design thinking necessarily requires you to engage in a social as well as an individual mode of action. But having said that, you know, I don't think we are at all powerless, certainly in our own classrooms. And I think, you know, we can also treat learning itself as a wicked problem, and then we're going, well, okay, well, how are we going to deal with these problems of culture and you know, so the culture of individualized learning assessments and then against social media that you mentioned before, and other kinds of tensions, and then say, well, how do we get our own students to understand these tensions, and can we do that, and will that help us?
That's wonderful. I used to wonder about schools holding the keys of knowledge. I'm not even sure if we can agree on the furnishing for the room, but we do know what the rooms are for, so at least we've got some consensus about where we're heading. Michael, we might wind things up with some closing thoughts from the Hangout crew. Jason?
Yes, probably the thing I've taken away from Michael this evening is the concept of permanent beta in terms of solutions, and not deciding on or not framing the design process around coming up with a solution. I can see some challenges in that around management and funding bodies supporting an ongoing process rather than an attempt to resolve a particular issue, but I certainly agree that the nature of most problems are iterative and should be considered as such.
Michael?
Yes.
Some closing
Some closing thoughts. I've been talking for 40 minutes.
This
is your chance to say, come along and do the plug for the conference.
Yeah, or which craft items can I bring?
No, I'm sure we'll try and provide all craft items. Look, I don't have any closing thoughts, really, because I think we've touched on things a few times, so I'll start repeating myself. But I like Jason's idea that it really is a very challenging concept for administration, policymakers, budgeters to say, you know what, we want you to go out and fail. Because that's the way that people will start to understand when we talk about iterations. They won't be seeing it as iterations of success. They'll be seeing it as, what, you're not going to deliver us a solution? and we're speaking against so much change management speak and KPIs and understandings of budgeted items. You know, and inevitably that's why often we see things like in the digital revolution, you know, where they're happy to fund laptops, but when they get to the squidgy part of funding labour and professional learning and things like that, it gets a lot harder for them to actually decide on what they're going to do there.
Thank you. And Amanda, I'll let you close up, and don't forget the ACCE plug.
Okay, yes, I will. I think one of the things I've found most fascinating about the discussion this evening is just, you know, the greater context that we're trying to make these changes within, and the impact that we can actually have on students and learning, and that maybe we've been asking the wrong types of questions, and we should look at the messier kind of ideas. And I wonder if that idea of implementing approaches that include wicked problems and design thinking as part of the iterative strategy to not come up with a solution, but many opportunities to fail and grow, perhaps. I wonder if that change in itself, that growth, that mind shift, is actually part of a wicked problem too. And I must say I'm really looking forward to seeing you again at ACCE 2016 in Brisbane from the 29th of September to, I think it's the 3rd of October. I really should have looked at that. You can go to acce2016.acce.edu.au, pay now, and you'll get a free autographed something from Michael with craft. I just made that up. That's a complete lie. And yes, I'm looking forward to continuing our conversations then. And as always, if you'd like to join our panel for our exciting Hangouts, or you have suggestions for future shows, please let us know. You can view all of our past recordings on our ACCELN YouTube channel and the ACCE Learning Network community on Google+.
I'm going to auction away a learning wand, Amanda, and if it was mine, it'd be a laser pointer. Yeah. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.